The news cycles are saturated with kinetic events. Massive attacks on major cities, peace talks, the theater of conventional warfare. This is a deliberate misdirection. The strategic calculus has shifted. The primary threat vector is no longer a missile you can track on radar. It is an event you cannot see at all. It is silence. An asymmetric actor, facing a system engineered for efficiency, does not engage in a high-cost kinetic fight. The mathematical incentive is to identify and sever the system's central nervous system. According to RUSI analysis, over 97% of global communications and trillions in daily financial transactions travel through a few hundred vulnerable undersea fiber optic cables. This is the systemic choke point. Severing these connections, or blinding critical satellite constellations, does not weaken the opposing system, it paralyzes it. This creates the blind Leviathan, a globally coordinated economic and military superpower suddenly deprived of sight and sound. It possesses immense kinetic power, but is rendered inert, unable to direct sanctions, coordinate alliances, or even verify its own asset solvency. In this state of induced paralysis, the existing terrain becomes the weapon. Economic fragilities, like the capacitor shortage crippling the EV industry, become fatal bottlenecks. Political fractures such as Hungarian dissent over NATO expansion escalate from diplomatic friction to systemic rupture. The goal is not military victory. The goal is to trigger a cascading collapse where the system liquidates itself from within. This is asymmetric escalation. This is the silent vector. A nation-state does not go bankrupt like a company. It experiences a solvency crisis. This occurs when the state's projected liabilities, political, economic, and military, exceed its capacity to meet them. The Ukraine war is not a military campaign. It is the forced liquidation of Russia's national solvency on a global stage. The kinetic cost is the most visible drain. Massive attacks on Ukraine's largest cities, as documented by Sky News, require an unsustainable expenditure of hardware and personnel. However, the primary liability is not the battlefield. Authoritative analysis from strategic bodies like CSIS frames the war as a severe domestic liability for the Kremlin. An unpopular, protracted war corrodes the political capital required to govern. This creates a mathematical certainty. When the cost of conventional conflict threatens regime survival, the strategic calculus must pivot. It is no longer about winning kinetically. It is about surviving systemically. This is the trigger for the asymmetric pivot. A state facing a solvency crisis has a fiduciary duty to itself to abandon a losing conventional fight and instead target the systemic fragility of its opponent. The goal shifts from defeating armies to triggering a cascading collapse within the Western system's architecture. This weakness vectorizes every non-military point of failure. A capacitor shortage disrupting an entire industry, as reported by oilprice.com, is no longer just an economic problem. It's a targetable vulnerability. Political fractures like Hungary's stance on NATO expansion, cited by Bastille Post, are not internal debates. They are levers to be pulled. The collapse of emerging markets, detailed by Anahar, is not collateral damage. It is a weaponized outcome to induce a liquidity crisis. This strategy is not born of strength, but of desperation. It is a launch-on warning protocol for systemic insolvency. Unable to afford the kinetic price of victory, the weaker actor is forced to become an accelerant of chaos, aiming to prove that the hyper-efficient global system is, in fact, even more fragile and insolvent than its own. The math of modern warfare has inverted. The kinetic cost equation is broken. Analysts at the Royal United Services Institute, or RUSI, present the stark figures. A single main battle tank represents a capital asset of approximately $5 million. The first-person view drone used to achieve its kinetic liquidation can cost as little as $500. This is not simply a battlefield advantage. It is the protocol for what strategists call the democratization of violence. The barrier to entry for inflicting catastrophic asset destruction has collapsed to near zero. A weaker actor no longer needs a symmetrical industrial base to wage war. They only need a credit card. This 10,000 to 1 cost disparity provides a mathematical incentive to bypass conventional force-on-force engagements and apply kinetic pressure directly onto the most expensive and therefore most fragile assets of the opposing system. The primary battle space is no longer geographic. It is systemic. The kinetic conflict in Ukraine is a distraction, a loud and violent testbed designed to mask the true vectors of attack. The real war is being staged in the gray zones, the unprotected nodes of the global economic and political architecture. Reports from institutions like RUSI identify these zones not as regions of random chaos, but as designated proxy laboratories. Here, stress tests are conducted on the system's solvency without the kinetic cost of a direct military confrontation. Examine the data. The collapse of emerging markets, as documented in analysis from Anahar.com, is not a downstream effect of the war. It is the first stage of a systemic protocol. These economies are the initial test subjects for inducing cascading failure. Simultaneously, a capacitor shortage cripples the electric vehicle industry, as reported by oilprice.com. This is not a coincidence. It is a blueprint. A single low-cost component is leveraged to neutralize a multi-trillion-dollar strategic industrial objective. The math is irrefutable. The economic damage vector has a higher return on investment than a missile. The protocol extends beyond economics into political leverage. While Ukraine reels from massive attacks, the more significant strategic event is the fracturing of the alliance arrayed against the aggressor. The Hungarian Prime Minister's warning against Ukrainian NATO accession is a clinical example. This is not diplomacy. It is an asymmetric attack on coalition integrity. The objective is to trigger a political defection, creating a liability within the alliance that is more strategically valuable than destroying an armored division. The goal is to make the political cost of cohesion unbearable. This is the operational model of asymmetric escalation. It is no longer a battlefield tactic. It is a systemic weapons system. A conventionally weaker power, facing a coordinated global system, has a mathematical incentive to bypass kinetic resistance and target the system's engineered fragility. The Ukraine war is the kinetic test of this terrain. Every broken supply chain, every political fracture, is a data point proving the thesis. The vector is now clear. Regional conflict is the launch-on warning trigger for a cascading, systemic solvency crisis. The nuclear command structure was engineered for speed, not ambiguity. This is the logic behind the launch-on warning doctrine. It is not a policy. It is a systemic protocol. A pre-calculated response to a specific data input. Incoming ballistic missiles detected by a network of satellites and ground-based radar. The system was designed to eliminate human hesitation in the face of annihilation, guaranteeing a retaliatory strike before the first impact. The kinetic cost of a decapitation strike is infinite, so the system was optimized to prevent it. This protocol, however, contains a fatal dependency on data integrity. Now, introduce the fog of digital war. An asymmetric actor understands the blueprint. They do not need to defeat a carrier group. They need to defeat a sensor. According to analysts at CSIS, a sophisticated cyber attack can blind the entire early warning apparatus. Radars are spoofed. Satellite uplinks are severed. The commander is now operating blind. The protocol demands a decision within minutes. Is the loss of signal a technical malfunction, a capacitor failure in a critical node, or is it the opening salvo of a full-spectrum attack? The data is gone. All that remains is the logic of the doctrine. In a system built for efficiency, the absence of a signal is itself a signal. It implies the worst-case scenario is already in motion. To wait for confirmation is to accept the kinetic destruction of their own command structure. The mathematical incentive, therefore, shifts entirely. The fear of inaction outweighs the fear of a false positive. The commander is forced to launch based not on what they see, but on what they can no longer see. The asymmetric attack is successful, not when it destroys hardware, but when it forces the opposing system to liquidate itself based on its own internal logic. This is the vector by which systemic fragility escalates to existential risk. The efficiency of the global system is its primary liability. The capacitor shortage is not an industrial footnote. It is a systemic vulnerability report, source number 3. The political fracture within NATO, evidenced by Hungary's stance, is not dissent. It is a crack in the coordinated economic front, source number 2. While kinetic assets are exchanged in Ukraine, source number 4, the real war is being fought against the architecture of the system itself. Reports from RUSI confirm this is the new battle space, the fragile, hyper-efficient links that bind the global economy and its dependent emerging markets, source number 1. This creates a mathematical incentive for asymmetric escalation. A conventionally weaker actor facing systemic economic pressure has a zero-sum incentive to bypass kinetic confrontation. The goal is not to win kinetically, but to trigger a cascading solvency crisis in the opposing system. A single point of failure in a just-in-time supply chain becomes the primary target. This is not a theory. It is the active protocol for 21st century conflict, where a broken component becomes a more powerful weapon than a tank division. Therefore, the next logical event is a test of this systemic kill switch. Within the next 12 months, expect a calibration shot, a significant attribution impossible disruption of critical infrastructure. The highest probability vector is a synchronized cyber-physical attack targeting the operational logistics software of a major Western port, Rotterdam, Los Angeles. Triggering a multi-day, grid-down shutdown, it will be publicly attributed to catastrophic system failure or sophisticated ransomware. It will be neither. It is a proof of concept for systemic collapse, executed with plausible deniability,